Hello there everyone and welcome to a special Cassius Q&A today. I put out a community post asking you guys for your questions on the Cassius series so far. If you're unaware, Cassius is the series of fan fictions, fan stories that I've been writing set in the Star Wars universe. There are currently 7 full books out, and the 8th one is currently coming out as it progresses. So if you don't know what any of this is, do go check out the first book, Cassius Jedi Apprentice, and you can follow along with the books from there. And if not, well, just find another video on the channel if you like it, and let's just get right into this because I'm tripping over my words here. We have a few questions here. So the first one, we got a couple questions here from Diamond360. He says, I got many questions here for you. Was there a specific moment in one of the Cassius books that stood out to you while you wrote it, in any emotion or way? There's been a couple of those. I'd say, so one of the most, visceral moments of my writing that actually got a serious emotional response from me was in Cassius Nightfall, and it's that particular scene in chapter 7. I won't spoil it for those of you who haven't seen it, but if you know, you know. That was one of the most gut-wrenching scenes I've had to write, and it really hit me on an emotional level. But in terms of other moments, the final moments of the last chapter of Cassius Jedi Master, I think, has been one of my favorite moments that I've written. In fact, that whole chapter, I think, is one of my favorite chapters of the series that I've written. I really, really enjoyed writing all that out. But so there's been a lot of moments that I could say are up there in my favorites. Another one being the end of the duel between Cassius and Shara in Jedi Exile. Cassius, Vader, and Dravok in the Inner Storm. There's so many moments that I've really loved writing. I can't narrow it down to one specific moment, but I'd say go with the Nightfall one if you're looking for the one that had the biggest emotional impact on me. He then asks, how do you manage the timeline of Cassius? Do you have the whole story arc planned out, or do you have a basic outline of the main plot points and characters, and the rest comes during the book? That is a great question. I've actually answered this a couple times before. So with Cassius, I have his entire story outlined. I have everything from, Jedi Apprentice all the way up to the final book, and I won't say what that is, but I have everything in his entire life, his entire story outlined. Every major event that happens is outlined, and so when I'm writing these, it's just a matter of connecting the dots, so to speak. Getting from point A to point B to point B, point A to point B to point C, filling in the gaps, so to speak. And I find it's been super fun to write because I have an outline, but now the way that I fill in these gaps is always a creative challenge for me. And I love that. I love thinking like, well, how am I going to get them from here to here? How are they going to get from this event to this event? That's why I'm excited and also very nervous writing out this current book, Cassius Ashes of the Order, because it's such a challenge because so much is going to happen in this book, and the fact of how we're getting from one point to another point, it's all going to be very challenging, but I think I've got a good story going so far. He then asks, what is one character interaction of Cassius characters that has never happened before that you would love to have seen? I'm assuming you mean like characters in the story that never met, but it would have been amazing for them to meet. If we're talking like characters from my stories meeting established characters in canon, that's a tough one. I'd say probably Corbin meeting Anakin, I think, would be a very interesting one because both of these characters hold a lot of anger and aggression inside them. And I think it would be interesting seeing how these two characters work off of each other. But Dravok and, the Emperor, and even, Cassius and the Emperor would be a very interesting meetup. Like, because Cassius hadn't really met Palpatine too many times. Like, he met him once in Cassius Clone Wars. But just to imagine Cassius' words towards the man who was responsible for the downfall of the Jedi, man, that would be a really interesting thing to write if I ever wanted to do some like alternate universe stuff. And then his final question: who has been your favorite Cassius villain to write? Which of these villains do you think had the biggest impact, was the most enjoyable to bring to the story, and the one who hit the most as a character? Definitely Dravok. So a lot of the villains from the Cassius stories are either minor villains that I've written, or they are major villains from the established stories, like Vader, Boba Fett, Dengar. But with Dravok, he was actually a character who was created by Thomas, the other member of Concordia Jedi. But I was the one who wrote out his story. I was the one who, when Thomas said, "Do you think you can find a way to fit him into your Cassius stories?" I said, "Yeah, I think I can." And so writing out a character like Dravok was such a joy, because he's such a bastard, but he's also, he's driven by a strong, sense that what he's doing is right, that he's not the bad guy, that it's these people that are the bad guys, they've lost their ways, or no, I'm not the villain, you're the real villain. And having to write a character who's so strong in his convictions when you know that this character is doing such terrible things is always interesting. And having him go from one of the primary antagonists of the first book to a secondary protagonist in his final appearance was one of my favorite things I've written with Dravok. And the impact he had on Cassius as a character, first being a major villain to him, then becoming, a sort of mentor to him in the Inner Storm. And even though these characters still don't like each other, the fact that they have no one else to call upon if they're going to achieve this task, they have to work together. It was very fun writing for Dravok, and I think he was probably my favorite villain to write in the series so far. Diamond360, thank you for your questions. We now have a question from Jordan Cox, who says, I have 3 questions for you, another multi-parter. 1. Which recent Cassius book do you think has been your favorite to write? Definitely Cassius Jedi Exile. Jedi Exile has been my favorite book to write. I said that in I believe the last Q&A, but it was the first book where I was able to really, not everything had to be driven by, now we've got to go here because there's a war going on, or we've got to go over here to fight this person. It was writing for Cassius when he's at a point where he's in a totally helpless situation. All he can do is sit and wait. And so through that, Jedi Exile was a lot more of a character study in a lot of ways. Getting to dive into the psychology and the character of Cassius, I think, was one of my favorite things to do with that book. Not only that, it had one of my favorite moments to write with Cassius in the Enclave speaking to the spirit of Nomi's Sunrider. I absolutely loved writing that. Shaylin Fairweather did a fantastic job voicing her. But yeah, Jedi Exile, I think, even though I think in terms of like mistakes I've made with recordings, Jedi Exile is probably one of the most full of them. I noticed a lot of grammatical errors when I go back and listen to it, but I think the story itself outweighs the errors, and I really, really loved writing Jedi Exile. I have a soft spot for writing characters when they're in their darkest moments, and so I think Jedi Exile is definitely my favorite. Number 2, how did you come up with the character of Liara? So, the character of Liara originally started out as a character called Liana, and originally she was not going to be as young as she was when Cassius found her. In fact, she was going to be around his age, but he was still going to train her. They would have been on more of a even playing field in terms of who's got the power in their relationship, or the dynamic of who's teaching who, the dynamic of who's in charge, would have been more of a back and forth between the two of them. But as I started writing out the outlines and trying to see how this story could play out in a way that's really interesting, I thought to myself, what if, we did a role reversal with Cassius? Like, Cassius was a young boy who was trained by a female master. Now what if we switch that around? Cassius, a male, now training a young girl in the ways of the Force. So my reasoning was kind of this idea that Cassius is, in a sense, trying to fill the shoes of his master in a very ironic twist, in that he never thought he was going to have an apprentice. Now that he does, it's almost a mirror image of his training under his master. I knew I wanted a character who had an innocence to her, who was still strong, like still had a backbone, not gonna cower away in the corner, but a character who, when push comes to shove, is still going to stand up for herself and her friends. And that slowly morphed into the character now known as Liara. So that's how I came up with the character of Liara. Number 3, do you think you would be interested in writing a book series focused solely on Liara and her journey? I don't know. I'm still there's still plenty of Cassius left to write. If I did something for Liara, I would have to really think about where to take her story, and do I go, or figure out what direction I would go with it, because most of her story will be told in the Cassius books, the Cassius books. Sorry, but you never say never. There's always a possibility going into the future that I could do more with Liara. Thank you for your questions. The Serpent asks, could you do another poll for our favorite duel once more people have caught up to the newest book? And why is everything so well written? Well, thank you very much. So here's the thing. Me being the writer, I can't call my stuff well written or it comes off as narcissistic. What I will say is that most of the time I'm very careful with how I write. I always try to focus on the characters first. The characters are the bread and butter of the story. You can have the most fantastic setting, like the Star Wars universe. You could have the most fantastic setting, but if the characters aren't well written and identifiable, then the story is going to fall flat. So is the setting. So I always try to make sure the characters are relatable, identifiable, and consistent as much as I can. Now, I still do make mistakes, but I always try to make sure that everything is the way I want it to be, like the way I see it in my head before I write it down. As for another poll on the favorite duel, absolutely, I can do another one once we're all caught up. For the record, I'd say my favorite duel in the series is probably still Cassius and Dravok versus Vader, but I'm biased because I wrote it. So thank you very much for your question. Don't at me 420. Would you ever do a what if on Cassius, such as what if the Nexu killed the trio in Jedi Apprentice? It's a possibility. It would have to be a little bit of a different layout than my normal what ifs, because I don't have a ton of artwork of Cassius and the other characters. I don't have any artwork of Corbin at the moment. So I'd want to make sure I had either some artwork, or if you guys wanted, I could just do it in this same kind of format we're doing with the Cassius stories. Just kind of write it out like one of the novels, but take it in a different direction. That might be fun to do at some point. David Lelevilt, or Leleville, I don't know. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, dude. He says, okay, well, I was going to ask how Cassius Jedi Master was originally going to end, but I was not expecting a Q&A so soon, so no worries if you can't answer that yet. I actually can't answer that yet. or I actually can't answer that right now. I'm sorry, I'm tripping over my words today. Cassius Jedi Master, I originally planned it to be 20 chapters, one of the longer books in the series. But once I got to chapter 17 and I was writing it out, and as I got towards the end of the chapter, I'm like, I could keep going. I could stretch this out a little longer. But honestly, I think this is probably the best place to end this book right here. Like, there's no need to stretch it out any further. We got a perfect ending to the book right here. And so that was my reasoning there. I just figured the next 3 chapters were basically going to be a little bit more of Cassius and Liara training before, looking off towards the future, like what's going to happen next, and the introduction of the villain of the new book, Minister Locke Tambin. Like, the opening prologue to Cassius Ashes of the Order was originally supposed to be the ending epilogue to Cassius Jedi Master, but I decided it worked better as a prologue than an epilogue, and so I made a decision, and I said, let's cut the book at 17 chapters and let's save this other stuff here for the next book. So that is how Jedi Master was originally going to end. And a lot of elements that came from my first and earlier drafts of Jedi Master, you will be seeing a couple of them in Ashes of the Order. So when Ashes of the Order is all done, I'll do another Q&A. If you have any other questions there about the book, I can absolutely answer them. Zachary Wagster asks, I only have one question. If you had to change one thing about Cassius, what would it be? That's a tough question. Honestly, I'm very happy with the story for the most part. I think the story I've written, I'm very, very proud of. What I would change, and what I might do at some point if I have, the time and the energy and, the gusto, I might go back with better equipment and more voice actors and re-record the entire re-record the first couple of books, or maybe even just once the whole series is done, just re-record the entire series in more of an audio drama style format, which I think would be really fun to do. Have all these characters, voiced by different voice actors, and really just having fun with it. Putting out a really fun listen, a really fun story that everyone can sit down and just enjoy. In terms of other things I would change, I have made a few little continuity errors that aren't major. They don't affect the story all that much, but they still stick out in my head, as well as like little name slip-ups. Like in Jedi Exile, I accidentally called Sabo Harbo several times, and each time I heard it, I'm like, no, you did it again, no. So I would probably go back and change, little mistakes that really bugged me. But as far as the story and characters go, I'm more or less very happy with them. And now, Don't At Me 420 again says, will Pip ever get his drip? Well, Don't At Me, take a look at Drippin' Pip. Feast your eyes. The next questions we got here are from the Ultimate Shadow 95. He says, hey dude, got a couple of questions for you if you don't mind. Number 1, if Corbin and Cassius were to both reach their full potential, who would win? I ask this because they both seem to be prodigies in their own right. Cassius with the Force, his M count of 14,000 is higher than most Jedi Council members. Now, I know how we had talked about that before I continue. I want to say that was mainly my sort of estimate as to like his potential with his midichlorian count. In terms of like his skills and his abilities, he's not the greatest Jedi. He's very similar to Obi-Wan in a lot of ways, in that most of his skill and ability pales in comparison to others, but it's the way he makes use of them that makes him so adept at what he does. But I digress. So Cassius with the Force and Corbin with the Blade, and this has left me wondering as to who's truly the most powerful between the two. Well, that's a very good question. If they had both continued to train, if, let's say, the events of Order 66 never happened, if they were both to train and reach their full potential, my guess is that most likely Cassius would win against Corbin, but I feel the fight would be very close. One thing Corbin always struggled with was tunnel vision. It's what got him into trouble in his first fight with Cassius, and what sort of got him into trouble in their final duel. I think Cassius knows Corbin well enough that he'd know what to look for to exploit a weakness in Corbin's strategy. But then again, who knows? Corbin might absolutely overpower Cassius. I think it's kind of a coin toss, but my money's on Cassius. Number 2, if you could give Cassius any one unique force power, what would it be? This ranges from psychometry to electric judgment, shatterpoint, and more. I think what I would give Cassius, if I were to give him some unique force power, I would probably give him some form of battle meditation. It's because meditation is one of Cassius, comforts. It's what he does when he's unsure, when he needs to think. He always turns back to meditation. So I'd say probably a form of battle meditation is what I give Cassius. As to the specifics, I can't really answer. Most likely something that would just invigorate his spirit and keep him fighting. That's probably what I would give him. Number 3, when it comes to Jedi Cassius, which version of Star Wars are you going with? Legends or canon? Because Ahsoka has been noted to exist in both versions of Star Wars. So that's a good question. I'd say Cassius, I try to keep the story of Cassius mainly tied as close to canon as I can. With that said, I do like bringing in elements of Legends from time to time, like the planet Blenjeel from The Inner Storm. I loved bringing that in because that was from one of my favorite video games, Jedi Academy. Bakura, which we see in the newest book, another planet that I remember playing on in Jedi Academy. There's lots of different little elements, like things that don't necessarily change canon, but that help to enrich the story overall. So I'd say I mainly tie him into canon, but I do bring in elements of Legends. Next one, what drove you to create the Jedi Cassius story? Because quite frankly, it's some of the best pieces of Star Wars media I've ever seen. Thank you very much. I've said this before, the story of Cassius I wrote out when I was like 15, or the very basic ideas of what I was trying to do. And when it started, he was basically just like a Sonic OC. It's like, yeah, he's my original character, but is he? No. He was a very bland character, mainly just there to fight a lot of the big established baddies. But then, last year I had a lot more free time on my hands, and the channel was starting to grow, and I figured, you know what? I remember, writing about this character. I remember telling my friends about him. We were all coming up with ideas, and I always told them I wanted to write it out, and I said, you know what? Why don't we do that now? Let's write them out and then narrate them on the channel. And so that's kind of what drove me to it. Was I had the ideas, and I just wanted to put them to paper, and the fact that so many people are listening to them is frankly humbling. The next question. Wow, you got a lot. What do you think would have happened if Ezra Bridger was found before the end of the OG trilogy after his sacrifice at the end of Rebels? He would have had to come into contact with Pip the Conqueror, so it wouldn't have gone well for him. Now, if he was found before the end of the OG trilogy after his sacrifice at the end of I'm really not sure what would happen, but I'm kind of scatterbrained right now. I assume you mean like if he was found after the original trilogy. If he was found after the original trilogy, he'd probably be taken under and trained by Luke. But it's hard to say. If you could give me any advice on how to make a story, what would it be? Because I'm currently trying to make my own story. Let's see. Again, I say the characters need to be the main focus. Everyone always makes the mistake going in early of let's go big and let's add a lot of exposition. They try to flesh out the universe too much early on, and it just clutters everything up. Focus first and foremost on trying to make your characters identifiable, relatable, and human. That's what you should focus on first. If the character is interesting, the story will follow along suit. Obviously, that's not to say you can slack on the story, but it means focus on the character first. The characters are what will keep the reader or the listener invested. Thank you for your many, many questions. Deb the Second says, sorry if this is a basic one, but what is your favorite Cassius story to write so far? Again, Jedi Exile. Again, I loved writing that one out so much, just diving into the psychology of Cassius. So Jedi Exile, thank you very much, very much. Samuel Hutchinson says, in the new season, or the new book, will we see any of the old characters, like a young Han Solo and Chewie, or any of the characters from Rebels? I cannot answer that at the moment. I will say, in terms of bringing in more and more legacy characters, try to temper your expectations a bit. There's always the possibility, and I do have some things planned, but I can't spoil anything right now. I will just say, don't be expecting to see any huge earth-shaking cameos from Obi-Wan Kenobi or Han Solo or Chewbacca, or big names that I think would kind of steal the spotlight from the main characters. But there are going to be some big reveals in the future, but again, I can't spoil anything. Now we have a question here from Clone Commander Caleb, who says, how powerful do you feel Cassius is compared to other Star Wars characters? Personally, I feel he's on the level of Aayla Secura. That's not a bad assessment. So I've said this before. I think Cassius has a lot of potential in the Force. I think very similar to Anakin, though not nearly as powerful. I think Cassius had a lot of potential, but he always had something that was, holding him back, whether that was his attachments, his fear, or whatever it was. He always had something that was keeping him from reaching that potential. He's not the most powerful Jedi we've ever seen. I'd say he's probably somewhere around the middle in terms of what a Padawan should be. Early on, it was always Corbin who was the prodigy. Cassius' true strengths come from his determination, his creativity in a fight, and his insight and his love for his friends. That's where his strength comes from, more than his skill or his Force abilities. It's the little things that give him the slight advantage. And now our final question here is from 212th Trooper, who says, if Cassius existed in Jedi Grievous universe created by Star Wars Elseworlds, big shout out to my good buddy Elseworlds, how are you doing, buddy? Or vice versa, how do you think such an interaction between the two would go? Considering General Grievous essentially replaces Sindralig in that timeline, it could be interesting. That would be really interesting, especially considering in Clone Wars Part 3, Grievous plays a major role in that part of the story. It would definitely be interesting, because seeing Jedi General Grievous, like the What If by Elseworlds, his Jedi version of Grievous seems like an extremely no-nonsense type of person. Someone who I think would, butt heads a lot with Cassius, and especially Corbin. He wouldn't take any of them. They're fooling around. But at the same time, I think when things like the threat of Dravok or the Trandoshans from Jedi Apprentice, I think if those things came up and Cassius and Corbin and Sarah told him that they have some ideas as who's behind it and they want to help, I think that Jedi Grievous probably would have been a lot more willing to accept their help. I think he was a fair bit more, I'd say, I don't want to say humble, but a bit more open to that than someone like Sindralig was. So I think it would be really interesting to see, especially if he's training them like Sindralig trained Sarah, Corbin, and Cassius in the advanced lessons. I wonder if he would teach Cassius how to do that saber fan thing, just rotating the wrists. No. Yeah, I'd have to actually talk to Elseworlds about that. That might be something to run by him, like if we ever wanted to do like a collaboration in the future, like of a possible what if involving Jedi, Grievous, and Cassius. That might be a fun thing to do. And I think that'll do it for this Q&A. Thank you guys for making this the absolute longest Q&A video we've done on this channel. So many great questions. Thank you guys. Really, this means a lot. This is showing me that people are invested in the Cassius story and where it's going from here. So thank you all so much for your questions. If you have any more, I'll try to get them in the next Q&A. Please leave a like, comment below. You can go check out our Patreon too if you want to support the channel. And may the Force be with you always.